It's spinning. It's spinning. Hi, you guys. It's Tevis, and we are in for a really cool game changer chat. As you guys know, I started this series because I wrote a book about people who step into their own lives with a sense of mastery and a sense of freedom. And so I've been digging into my little personal Rolodex and looking for people in my extended circle and beyond who have shown me a lot about how do you navigate this world in such a way that you're true to yourself. And my guest is Elizabeth Cunningham. She is a renowned feminist author, fiction writer, a massive research hound. I just can't even believe how she digs up all the information that she does. Before we dive into this conversation with her, game changer. Before we dive in, though, I do have a couple tech comments. For those of you who want to ask her a question real time, for some reason, if you're watching this from Facebook, we will not be able to see your comments or questions until afterwards. Now, I know both she and I are committed to being available to questions and comments. So we will circle back afterwards and see if there's something there for us to ask. But if you want to ask something real time or make a comment real time, pop over to LinkedIn because for some reason their comment feed does work. So who knows? It's a mystery.
And it's Mercury retrograde now too.
Oh, Mars retrograde. Yeah. Oh, my astro friends, right? I've got these astro friends who follow all that stuff, and they've just really warned me that right now is a sit tight, watch a movie, eat healthy, and try to go to bed early kind of time. So
and vote early too, even though it is vote early. Vote as much as you can.
Yeah. What was the famous quote from Mayor Daley of Chicago?
Vote early, vote often.
Yeah. Well,
but only if you're voting who I vote or who I vote for.
Yeah, exactly. So, Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Tevis, for having me.
So,
it's a brilliant show and a brilliant book.
So I met Elizabeth because we share a mutual friend, and Elizabeth took us hiking a number of times, and she is masterful at knowing some of the most beautiful secret spots in this area in the Catskills. And I'm not going to ask her to divulge any of them because I want them all for ourselves because we're selfish that way. But one of the ways I love to kick off these conversations is to ask, what was your favorite thing to do as a young one?
Climb trees.
Climb trees.
Of course. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite?
Yeah, it's still the favorite. Well, I don't climb trees so much anymore, but my favorite thing is to still be outside.
So was there a favorite tree?
There are lots of trees. I grew up in a rectory at a church, and it had, it had several yards, and there were a lot of trees. And I had this whole thing of every tree was a room in a house, and there was one tree that you could climb up to get away from dragons or whatever, or to meet them. I don't know. And I changed the driveway into a river, and it was a whole world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was one tree in the yard to climb, but my brother and I would go looking for trees to climb in the woods.
So where was this? What country? What part of the world?
Oh, it was not very far from I don't know where everybody else is, but you and I are in the Hudson Valley. You and I are on the west side of the river, but I grew up on the east side in Millbrook, New York. Sleepy little town at the time.
Mm-hmm. Was it as fancy then?
Pardon me?
Was it as fancy then?
No. Although it always had some people who had horses, and they didn't really live in the village. We called them hilltoppers because they had the hilltop houses, and they had their own church. And in one of my books, which I wrote about this place in Murder at the Romagedale, I didn't write about the Hilltopper Church, but somebody makes a reference to it as the Church of the Horse and the Hound.
the church.
But it did not have a lot of antique shops. It was just a little town. It was very little.
So what was it like? Because I know that you grew up. I'm going to change my speaker setting real quick because I think we're getting some feedback and that just will not do. Let's try this one. There, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I don't have feedback happening.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So from what I've read, you grew up from a long line of Episcopalian clergy.
Yeah.
What was it like being the pastor's kid?
Well, it was a mixed bag. I think that my mother really hated being a minister's wife, but I think for a kid, you just grow up where you grow up. And it was kind of fun having people coming and going all the time and having grown-ups to spy on. Used to break into the parish house, spy. I don't think I had that great an impression of God, but I did have exposure to really wonderful language in the Book of Common Prayer and the King James Bible, and I think that very much influenced my ear because I heard those words before I could read. They weren't all very nice. Things like we acknowledge and bewail our manifold sins and wickedness, which we from time to time most grievously have committed, provoking most justly thy wrath and indignation against us, things like that. And we are not worthy so much as to gather up the crumbs from beneath thy table. Yeah, I mean, it was very beautiful, ornate language, and some of it was comforting, but a lot of it was like, I don't really think God likes us very much. Yeah, and after all, my father was sort of like, and back in those days, the minister wore all the robes and stood up above everybody. So yeah. I got a little confused about God the Father and my father and the Holy Ghost. We didn't say spirit, we said ghost. So, I was watching cartoons and there's Casper. I think people of my generation remember Casper, the friendly ghost who looked like a sperm,
I remember. Yeah, did look like a sperm.
I didn't know about sperm then, but it's strange to grow up so inside something that nobody's really exactly explaining or indoctrinating you. You're just absorbing it.
Yeah. What do you think when you think about that idea of God, right? Because the books of yours that I have read, there are many thoughts about creation. There are many faiths, both honored and unpacked. Yes, the Passion of Mary Magdalene, that has been my addiction for 2 months.
Yeah. Well, that was not an early book of mine at all. That was a book that I had to work up to. And I think that when you're raised with God the Father in a very hierarchical kind of situation, well, the first thing that happened was that I became a Quaker because everybody sat, in the meeting I went to, we sat basically facing each other. So that told you God is found in the person you are face to face with, not up, up, up. The churches, when you think about it, they're arranged like a courtroom. Yeah. So I was very drawn to Quakers because they sat face to face, they sat in silence, and anybody who was moved could speak. So that was the first place that I went. And then, of course, when you're in the silence and you're not saying the same creed over and over again, other things start to well up, like the goddess. So, and yes, I have these really deep roots in the church. So I wrote something called The Return of the Goddess, another book. But I think eventually I had to write that story myself. And I wanted to write it not from the point of view of a disciple or a convert, but from someone who never converts, who's never a disciple. And that's my Maeve. I mean, a lot of people see Mary Magdalene as a big time disciple who should have been Jesus' successor, but my Maeve is a little more irreverent than that.
Yeah.
But she loves him, but she is not going to convert.
Well, she wasn't a follower, right?
No, she's not a follower.
Yeah.
No.
So growing up, Millbrook, New York, pastor's kid. You're exposed to great language. You're opposed to some not so sympathetic ideas of a supreme being. What is really evident in your writing, and I just want to tell everyone, you have been writing for a long time. One of your books is now celebrating a 25th anniversary in print.
Yeah. Or a 25th anniversary since it was first published.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
which is now a couple of years ago, the 25th anniversary. But anyway, I've been around. They've been around. I've been around. I've been around.
But how did this start to take shape? I mean, you brought up that by sitting in silence and by sitting across a circle of other flawed, perfect, imperfect human beings, that you had a different experience of creation. And how did you get from being that kid who liked to spy on the grown-ups in the rectory and run into the trees to look for dragons, which at this point sound a lot more compelling and a lot less condemning than the God you were introduced to?
Oh, yeah. Well, I suppose you could say that in some ways, you know, having that love of being outdoors and stepping from the churchyard into this old overgrown estate that was next door, that was quite magical. It said no trespassing. So, of course, we trespassed. Eventually, we got permission to go there, but it was very, very magical. It was like stepping into the other world. So even though I was raised Christian and didn't know anything about non-Christian religions, you could say that I always belonged to the earth and experienced the earth at times and still do at times as female.
Yeah. But how did you get there? How do you go from running around in trees to being someone who has created the volume of literature that you have that absolutely honors and respects?
Well, I don't see the contradiction because I still run around in trees. But I think
that people learn from how you navigated, because
how I navigated is that I think I always had to write, always, from when I was very, very young. And basically, I was raised on stories. I was not only raised on the Christian story, I was raised on fairy tales. I was raised on C.S. Lewis, Narnia books. I can remember being able to walk to the library down the street when I was 6. So I just, I was always taking library books out, and story was very important to me. So I had to tell my own stories. So it really was, I don't remember being without story, either reading it, hearing it, wanting to make up my own. I don't remember a time when I didn't.
Yeah. What is story to you? What does it do for you?
What is story? I think that story I think story gives shape and meaning to, what otherwise is like, whoa, what is that? But it doesn't impose it. I think the thing that I really like about story is that a good story, if you're reading it or you're telling it, has this element of surprise to it. And that's how, when I write, that's what I love, is that I'm constantly being surprised. And yet, certainly when I reread a book that I love, even though I know the plot, it can still be just as, not suspenseful in the sense that I don't know what's going to happen, but it still holds me that way. And I think how we tell stories is really important. And I think one problem we have in the modern world is we really don't understand story. There's so much fundamentalism and literalism. And there's also, Maeve's mothers like to say a story is true if it's well told. But I got really nervous about that because people are telling incredible, horrible, horrifying, damaging stories and trying to say that they're not stories, that they're truth. That's happening a lot in the current political climate. And people are making up stuff I couldn't even begin to. I was like, whoa, my imagination is kind of a petty, paltry thing. I can't think of stuff like that. But instead of saying, I'm telling a story because I'm trying to bring meaning, they're saying, this is the truth. And I think that's really damaging. I think people don't understand story as a way of conveying emotional truth, psychological truth, mythic truth, personal truth. They don't. They're really confused about what story is, and I should probably write about that more and think about that more, because I think we have a real problem today. I mean, because we have people say, oh, well, we have terrible stories that people tell about immigrants and refugees. I mean, they don't even think of them as refugees. We have terrible stories that we tell about people who are different, who are a different color or a different religion. Terrible stories. And people say, oh, that's true because I heard that on the news, or I heard that, whatever. I mean, I think that's really something distressing. I think people need to understand story as something different, as a healing, something to heal with, and something to recognize that it's a kind of truth, but people are telling stories that are actually harmful lies, and they're saying they're facts.
Yeah. That's gotta be hurtful for someone with such reverence of a craft and reverence of the power of that craft. To see that craft deployed for the purposes of hurting and dividing, that's gotta be.
Yeah. And people don't recognize that they're not telling truth, that they're making things up. They don't recognize. Sometimes I go, come on, just be a novelist. Stop. Just these are like write a thriller, write a mystery novel, write something.
So you wrote all your life. And what was your first book? How did you give yourself, like, it sounds like the compulsion to write has always been in you, that it was never an option not to. And I think that's an interesting idea of vocation, right?
For me, yeah. It wasn't an option not to in one sense for me, but my father didn't want me to write.
Okay, let's hear about that.
My father, and the way I was raised, it was a really good social gospel. It was like I was naked and he clothed me, I was hungry and he gave me to eat, which I still believe is really important. And if we just listened to that, we wouldn't be persecuting other people. But basically, direct action or direct social service was the only way. I later found out that both my grandfather and my father probably wanted to write, but they didn't feel that writing was valid. It was self-indulgent. It wasn't any kind of form of self-expression. Was very, very close to self-indulgence. So my father told me that I could not write because I knew nothing. And I would know nothing until I was at least 40, after I had been practicing as a social worker for a long time. Because in those days I couldn't become a minister, at that time, because there was no women's ordination until I was about 22 years old. So my father did not see storytelling or writing as valid.
So you people watching this, so many of us have some creative pursuit that we are told we're either not good at, we're never going to succeed at.
Right. That too.
Not worthy of doing. Who are you to fill in the blank?
Exactly.
Be a chef? Who are you to be a painter? Who are you to be a photographer? And I'm really fascinated by the people who are strong enough to hear that call inside of themselves and overcome. Because those voices from childhood are really freaking powerful.
Yeah, and I still hear it. I still hear it. So I think one thing to do, if you feel that, and you have especially a parent figure who's telling you no, just take what you can where it's given. Because there was a writer named Jay Williams who wrote children's books and mysteries novels, and for some reason I was staying with him. He was a family friend of my aunt and uncle, And he said, I was keeping a journal. So he said, so you want to be a writer? And I said, well, yeah, but I can't until I told him the thing about I couldn't do it till I was 40 and I had been
ratted out your dad, basically.
So I quoted my father and he said, Jane Austen, what did she know? Because she was somebody, he says she sat there and wrote some of the best novels in the English language, sitting at the table in her kitchen with her family. What did she know? So I took that and I took that in really deeply, and it helped.
How old were you in that moment?
I was about 15 then.
Perfect.
Yeah, and so this man who was a writer said, basically he was saying, of course you can write. You don't have to wait till you're 40. Jane Austen didn't wait till she was 40. Yeah. And that gave me some courage, but I still struggle. I still struggle with feeling like it's not worthy and that it doesn't serve anyone or anything.
Okay, so if anyone on this chat has read any of Elizabeth's books, then you know what a true contribution she has made. And I would love for you to give her some love, because we are going to talk about my favorite heroine, but but I think that question of worthiness, that question of validity, right? That question of, it's so funny. I talk to a lot of people about how they feel about, is my life valid, right? Are my choices valid? Is my contribution to the whole valid, et cetera? Do you think that's part of the human condition?
Not feeling valid? I don't know if it's part of the human condition. I really don't. I think it may be part of the modern human condition, because we don't. I mean, in some ways some of us have more choices, but I think there was a lot of time in history when we didn't. We just were like, we were going to do whatever we were born to do, which might not be very glamorous at all, but might be just to survive. And that's still the case for many people. And I don't think art was always this individual pursuit always. I mean, people, who built the cathedrals or who sang in the, it was more collective at times. And sometimes great art was really oppressive too, like people who built the pyramids. I mean, kind of a mixed bag. I have little conversations when I'm half awake. I actually talk to Jesus, because we got to know each other a bit. And I remember when I first knew I was going to write these books, I said, I was in Quaker meeting and I said, do you have anything that you want to say? Because I'm going to do this and you're going to be a character. And he said, yeah. He said, just please don't make me a prig. That was so. I basically, I can't remember where this was going, but I pester him sometimes. I say, well, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? What is being asked of me? And he said, be who you are. And I said, well, what? And he said, what do you think God did? And I said, well, you fed a lot of people. And he said, isn't that interesting that I fed the 5,000 and I also refused to turn bread into stones? And I mean, stones into bread. And I think I said something about words. So it's interesting to be told, be who you are. I think that may be what we're all being told ultimately, but it's very hard to do that, because a lot of people want us to be someone else. We want us to be someone else. The powers that be want us to be someone else.
Yeah. There's a great quote by the Kirtanwala Krishnadas. And one of the first times I sat with him, it was like 20 years ago in New York City. And he said, the trick is learning to be yourself, because everyone else is taken.
Yeah, that's taken. Yeah, for me it used to be, no, you can't be Mother Teresa. I'm sorry, no, you're not gonna.
She's right there behind me. I got her watching me. She's got my back.
And even she said, look, you can't be me and I can't be you, so that's good.
She did.
Yep, she said that.
A very pointed comment about dharma, right? Like rightful work. That your work is to follow your own path. And with Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss, and everything.
Yeah.
But we struggle with that.
And a lot of people don't have the chance even. Yeah, like I said, for a lot of people, it's like, I've just got to get through the day and find enough to eat. It's that.
Well, with that I think on everyone's mind, right? Because we're all concerned about the economy. We're concerned about various threats of violence that will be even more disruptive to livelihood. And so I want to ask you, like, let's say you can't do a huge pivot. Let's say someone like you always felt that call to write, or maybe like me, that call to teach yoga and do stuff like that, right? But maybe they have a bunch of kids, or maybe whatever commitments they have built for themselves at this moment are not allowing them to make that kind of a pivot.
Yeah.
I mean, how can people be true? We can't throw it all away, because you wrote through having how many kids?
3
kids.
Well, a stepdaughter and 2 children that were born. Yeah, from
so you raised kids. You were a writer. Have you had other professions? I know that you do some counseling, and I know that you work in music as well, which is also creative expression.
Oh, I didn't work in music professionally. That's just another thing. No, I mean, I think I've always had, I always knew from very early that I wanted that my best time was the morning to write. So I did things like, I was a waitress, I was a nanny, I worked at Upstate Films for a long time, which meant I could work at night. And then counseling is very flexible. But, I've had a lot of, family, I mean, not emotional support from my father, but I've had people who've had my back.
Yeah.
So I think that it's really, if you have to work a 40-plus hour week, it's harder. I mean, people do it. One thing I like to say to people who don't have a lot of time, or who have a lot of other obstacles in their way, not just economic ones, but maybe emotional ones or whatever, that if you have something that you want to do, like write a book or whatever it is, and you don't have a lot of time, the thing to do is that you can keep faith with it, even in a very short time. Even if you sit down and daydream for 15 minutes about it and set that time aside, or write 2 or 3 sentences, or sit there in front of the canvas. I mean, I think that part of what it is about keeping faith, and that it's nice to have huge amounts of time, but a lot of people don't. So it's also just about showing up and saying to the muse or whoever, whatever it is, I'm for real. I just told a client of mine who just came upon her that she was going to, write a book, and she just had a baby, and she held the baby in one arm and wrote on her phone with it. I mean, and she didn't have huge amounts of time to do it. And I said, well, that's okay. I said, if you think about it even every day, that's enough. That's good enough. Just keep faith with if you show up for the muse will show up for you.
If you show up for the muse. Okay, we could just stop the conversation. Like that's worth a week of contemplation. Seriously. If you just show up for the muse. And I love it that you brought up daydreaming.
Yeah, that counts.
Because the biggest disruptor of daydreaming is freaking social media and all of our screen time.
Yeah.
Can we prioritize our daydreaming?
It's really, I'll tell you, having started writing before computers, I was a terrible typist. And I had that discipline from a long, long time ago, from when I was 22. I mean, I think we're talking over 25. I don't know how long we're talking. Many years. It's harder now. It's harder. because of, oh, I'll just check my email, or I just want to look this up. I'm just going to look up this one thing.
And into the rabbit hole.
Yeah, so I have to, I mean, I still fall down, but the best days that I have are when I manage to not go online until I'm done. And that's hard. I used to write by hand, 2-hand drafts in little notebooks with scribbles. And then I got used to, even though I still type with 2 fingers, I got used to writing on the computer, so I do. A little too easy to sign on to email or look something up. I have to really say, nope, you can do that later.
Crack. It is crack. We get that adrenal surge, or we get a little hit of oxytocin because we see how many likes we got, or it's
really a lot tougher than it used to be, I have to say. I did notice, and I haven't done it every day, but sometimes when I realize I really, really can't do this, I would disconnect from the internet, and what I see on my computer is a little sphere, and it looks like it's a globe with an escape hole in it. And it's not really that hard to sign back on, but it's like, you're off. It's a little visual that says you are not online.
You are not attached to the matrix, and so therefore we cannot track everything that you're doing and figure out how to market to you because of it.
But I can't say I've had good days and bad days with that. But I will say it's tougher than when I started out at age 22 and had just a notebook.
Yeah,
it's really harder.
So with some of these conversations with Christ, right, with Jesus, and
my friend.
And oh, what a friend you have.
We have in Jesus, yeah. And I was like, okay, really, seriously, I'm going to tell you some shit. Yeah.
So,
no, seriously, I mean, seriously. I won't even go into what I sometimes saw.
Well, I'd love to.
And maybe too.
Maybe we should have a whiskey for that. But But so you go to Quaker meetings, you start to have this notion of
that was a long time ago. I don't anymore, but yes, I did. Yeah.
Of the goddess, where you start to have a relationship with Earth as being a spiritual force.
Yeah.
And as you begin to write, did your spirituality express itself through your writing from the very first book? Because you said you had to grow into.
Well, I had to grow into Maeve and taking on the whole gospel. But I would say that when I realized who it was, the story of how the goddess came to me and made herself known specifically, because I think she was always there. I was in my childbearing years, and I'd had a couple of miscarriages, and I thought, well, the church and Christianity is not addressing my body the way I need to have it addressed. And I was on my way to the doctor with the miscarriage when I suddenly just saw her, and I said, and I was thinking about all the books I wrote. The first one I wrote was called The Wild Mother, and I was just writing one about a wise woman who lived in the woods called How to Spin Gold. And I heard this voice that you have been looking for me all your life. Like, she was always there. I just didn't call that goddess. And then in the next book I wrote, I did call it goddess. And now I don't know that I particularly need that word anymore exactly.
What's a better word?
I did need it then.
But what's a better word at this point for you?
Oh, I don't know if I use any words right now. Sometimes I pray to the spirit that lives in and through all things. And I definitely talk to the God. I mean, for me, Maeve is the goddess, and Bridget and Isis. I mean, I think that when we have something like Jesus or the goddess or whatever, it's because we have to have a way to connect.
To identify.
I don't think of that as literal. It's just the way that I connect.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to decide whether it's true in some literal sense. It's true in the sense that I can actually speak. And I know that I feel heard and I feel answered quite often. Yeah. Not necessarily the way I want to be answered, but it's a way of connecting and relating. You know, I think in the Hindu tradition, what is it called? The path of devotion.
Bhakti. Yeah.
Bhakti. And I think for some people who really need that, and who need things to be particular and not abstract, that is a good thing.
Mm.
Almost the goddess is too abstract for me now. Like God is too abstract. And that's one reason why I wanted to write about Maeve. It's like, no, I don't just want, the eternal goddess who's like, in all her eternal this and that. I want her to have feet.
Yeah.
I want her to get pissed off and have bad days and good. I want her to be incarnate. So then I wrote about Maeve.
Okay, so you had to work up, as you put it in your words, to taking on the entire gospel.
Mm-hmm. And the New Testament too. I ended up taking on I ended up on taking St. Paul in the early church.
Well, no, you took on you took on a lot. You took on the Druids.
Mm-hmm. Right? I did. Isis. Mm-hmm.
Isis, the Egyptian tradition, right? You took on the pre-Christian Roman Romulus, the twin. Like you kind of took on the known canon of religions from roughly
the first century,
over. You took on
Judaism too.
Judaism, yeah. So one thing that takes major cojones, which we can translate as balls or ovaries.
Ovaries.
Major ovarian strength, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you had to trust yourself as a writer to be able to nail all that. As a researcher, to be able to hold some validity. And were you afraid of being ripped to shreds?
I was constantly afraid. I was like the scholars and the historians in my head, who probably a lot of them mostly didn't read anything I wrote, but they were always there saying, you don't know enough. You don't know how to do research. You don't know this. You don't know that. Oh yeah, I had to deal with that every day. And so a lot of what research is, a lot of it is like, find out what you have to know. What have you got to get right? What do you have to know? What's known and what can you make up? And Maeve is this sort of mouthy character who came to me in a 20th century form before she agreed to be in this book. So she gets to talk to you. And so I have a lot of freedom because I don't know how people talked in the first century. I don't speak Aramaic. I did take Latin. I did take Latin to try to understand the Roman brain. I took it as an adult to try to understand. But I was like, I'm not going to have people talking in some faux archaic way. I'm just going to have them talk. So I did a lot of research. I sort of immersed myself in translations, of course, of things. But I also traveled. I traveled to the places.
Where all did the research?
Well, writing these books took 20 years. So there were many different trips over time.
Wait. Let's underscore that. 20 years, people. 20 years.
Yeah.
For a work of passion, for a work of self-expression.
For 4 books.
For 4 books, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and I used to whine about it because I thought, I'm just going to write, I never wrote a book that had a sequel. And then I said to Maeve early on, I said, God, I think I can't get all this in one book. I might have to write 3 books. And if I have to do that, then it's going to take, and I sort of sit there figuring this is a way to waste time, how long it was going to take me. And so her answer was, yeah, what else have you got to do? Like she had no sympathy. And then I ended up having to write a 4th that I didn't expect to have to write. But over the course of that time, I think I went to most of the places. I went to England, Wales, Scotland, the Hebrides, because that's where I thought the Maeve's mothers lived, sort of, in the other world. I went to Israel. Rome, Italy. I went to Turkey, and I went to France. I think that's it. And then I went to England again for the last book.
Was it with researcher studiousness? Like, were you hitting the stacks and the archives, or were you just...
Oh, I did that, and I mean, I did that in libraries. But I think when I was traveling, I was really trying to get a feel of the place. And it always changed the story. I think one example is that anyone who's read Magdalene Rising knows there's this character called, I don't know how to actually pronounce her name, but I call her Dinwin. I found her when I went to Anglesey. I heard a story about, she was supposed to be from the 5th century, but with the Celts, it really doesn't matter. They're all over the place. I mean, the Bridget was supposed to have been the foster mother and the wet nurse of Jesus. They're all over the place. So I said, you can go back to the 1st century.
Wait. Is that true of Bridget? That Bridget...
it's a fact.
No.
No, it is true that the lore has her being... Bridget was an old goddess who morphed into a saint, who probably was a historical person, but her lore, which was inherited from the goddess and by the saint, meant that she was called the wet nurse of Mary. She was called the nurse of Mary. But she was, of course, from the 5th century. And so I figured Dinwin wouldn't have a problem. So Dinwin was supposed to be this witchy type of person who lived on a little tidal island, and she had a well of eels, and if you could go and find out your love luck. And I thought, well, yeah, all right. And I actually walked to that island and saw it. And then so Dinwin became an incredibly important character in that book and in the last book, and sort of would appear now and then. And that land and being there in that place was how she came. And there are stories like that for all the books. Like when I went to Israel, for me, Mary Magdalene and Mary Bethany had to be different because she grew up on an island in the Celtic otherworld. But also when I was there, Magdala is right on the Sea of Galilee. Mm-hmm. It's a very short boat ride to Capernaum, where Peter and everybody had their headquarters, and where Jesus walked around all the place preaching from boats. It's a really, 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 really different place than Jerusalem and Bethany. And so when I read the Gospels and lived them, it's like, oh, he really had a different kind of ministry when he was in Galilee. That's where he kept talking about the kingdom of heaven is like the kingdom of heaven. When he got to Jerusalem and things were a little rougher, he started making the dire predictions. And that's where he met his fate. And so if you're there on the land, it's like, oh yeah, the Galilean ministry is really different. It's a really different land, really different landscape, different occupations that people have, different vegetation. So I loved going to the place. I just loved it. And every book was changed because of it. I mean, I'd go on these trips in the process while I was writing.
What do you feel like you hope that your gift has been from, obviously, a lifetime of writing, but really understanding the depth and the breadth and the audacity of those books specifically, but like when we talked about the worthiness of our lives, what do you hope that your gift has been to the world?
Well, I'm only responsible for giving it, not for how it's received. I know, the really great thing, even though I still whine to Jesus and say, what am I supposed to do? He gets really sick of it. I do know, I'm lucky to know from enough people that the books have become part of their lives. And I think that's what any writer wants. It's for the story, you conceive it, you labor to bring it forth, and then somebody else takes it and they, in some sense, that's when it becomes alive and its life is added to every reading. I think reading is a really creative act. We don't read passively. We read and say, oh, and bring our own experience to it. And as much as I could, complain about social media, I've been very lucky because I've been able to hear a lot of people's stories and how the story is part of their story. And I talk to Maeve in the middle of the night, and I know a lot of other people do too. So she's real. And that doesn't, and I really realize that doesn't happen with every book or with every character. I'm lucky because she went off the page and did her own thing.
Yeah.
And that I've written I like all the books I've written, but I don't think that, I think she's the one who can live outside of the book. And I don't know if there's going to be a world. I don't know how long anything's going to last. I just know that, and I've never had a commercial breakthrough, really. I've had a great grassroots thing going on. But who knows? The only thing I know is that I didn't hold back.
Ooh.
And that's what I'm responsible for.
You didn't hold back.
I didn't hold back. I gave it all. I'm giving it all that I have. And sometimes, like I say, I don't think it's enough or it should be something else. But what I have, I'm giving. And I'm not really responsible very much for how it's received.
So how would you describe this gift? And I get it that what people get is what they get out of it. I completely understand that in gift giving, right? That
you don't know,
ever, right? You could kill yourself to give someone the perfect gift, and they could look at it and go, eh.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're like, what? Anyway, that's a different story. But because people may be watching this just out of curiosity and hearing from a long established author about process and about judgment and overcoming and dharma and all these questions that all of us carry. But I guess I'm really curious because I know what you say to be true, that reading is a creative act and it's a relationship. When you open a book, some people say once they start a book, they just have to finish it. I'm not one of those. I give myself complete permission to go, not for me, right?
Yeah, I do too.
Because it is such a relationship. It is such a cohabitation of consciousness. And
that's a good way to put it. Mm-hmm.
It is such a surrender of control and an autonomy, right? So the creative act of being a reader, I feel very strongly, and I feel like you nailed that the way that you said that. That said, this character, in fact, one of the things I have loved about your work is that it is very humanitarian, right? It is very embracing of any type of person, white, brown, rich, poor, prostitute, Puritan, like it literally, there's room for everyone in the worlds that you create.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, because this goddess figure that you birthed or that came through, right, Maeve, Magdalene, as she is expressed in these books, is really such a model for the messiness of the human experience as a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we're trying to separate that, right? We're trying to say, well, this is my spiritual self and this is my messy human self. And I'll use my spiritual side to try and compensate or heal or make up for all my flaws. And what is really amazing is that the model that you set forth says, no. This incarnate thing that you pointed out, Elizabeth, I think is really fascinating. And there are notions in Christianity, there's notions in every faith, right, that says that it's all of us. It's our whole enchilada, right, is loved. Our whole enchilada is our gift, is our being, right?
Yeah.
And that's what, if it's helpful at all, that's what I got from what you.
Oh, yeah, good. Well, I think that is what you got it. I mean, that's exactly it. That's what incarnation. I think that's what I still love about Jesus, and why I wanted to create a female counterpart, is because he was incarnate. He walked around. He had to wash his feet and wash other people's feet. And I think that, I think one of the really painful things, I let myself off the hook I'm an interfaith minister, and I have the Maeve and I have the Goddess, and I have my own way of relating to Jesus, but it is still painful to me to see Christianity be used in any way that's exclusive or judgmental, because I feel what you just said, I feel is what Maeve and Jesus, in the book anyway, and I think in the gospel, that's what they have in common. They fight. They don't see the world the same way. They don't believe the same things in some ways, but in this way of welcoming the stranger and sitting everyone down at the table, they are at one. And so I wanted to bring a Maeve into the world with that message, but also I do think that at the core, that's what Jesus was saying.
Yeah.
And he had a publicist called St. Paul, who had his moment, and he gets into the books too, but he created a theology that I don't find much of it in the gospel. Also, it was a theology. There are stories about St. Paul, but he wasn't a storyteller. Jesus was a storyteller. He is a story, and he told stories.
Yeah.
And so I told Maeve's story, and I'm very happy that I got a chance to do that. And I'm very happy to hear that that's how it came through to you, because that's what I hoped.
Yeah. Well, your hope came true.
Yeah. I think you said it very well. I think you said it as well as anybody could ever say
it. We are all in this together, and that's really what you bring across as being part of our bond, is human spirits. So the fierce truth of that, right?
And I think, I don't know how much Maeve and Jesus say it in the books. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But I feel like that has to be extended to all, not just humans now. I think that what's happening now, what's happening next, and what I wish I knew how to write about, or maybe I'll figure it out, is that there's all kinds of beings. There's tree beings and all kinds of plants. There's rivers. They all have spirit. They are all beings. They're not just things, they're beings. I call my kitty a feline being sometimes. They're not other. They're just other ways of being on the planet.
So it sounds like that's next.
Yeah, if I could, it's not very easy to figure out how to write it, but yeah, I think it's really important. I think that's a shift that's happening, not just in me, but I think it's a shift that's happening that has to happen.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait for you to write that book.
No, I'm doing my best. It takes a while.
Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you were hoping? You do have a new book out that's a mystery, correct? And
I have
music.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, yeah, because there was I didn't know if there'd be life in books after Maeve, but lo and behold, there is. There's been 2 poetry books. This is one, what we were just talking about. This book of poetry is like that. There's all these different voices that aren't necessarily human. Tell me the story again.
Tell me the story. What? Yeah. Wait, that's a great name. Tell me the story again.
Yeah, and it has all kinds of characters that are human, not human, trees, rocks, all those things speak in this book. It's a book of poems. You can find it on Amazon. Tell me the story again. This one is the first book I wrote after Maeve. And if you're curious about growing up in a small town church, this is the one.
Murder at the Rummage Sale.
That in 1960, when there were no malls and there was no Black Friday, so you lined up down the street to get into the rummage sale in every fall. And then I was supposed to write another little domestic cozy like this one, but I didn't. The same characters 8 years later. This is the one that's just come out. And I never fit the genre that I'm writing in exactly. So this is not just a mystery novel. I would call it, what I call it is a numinous thriller.
A numinous thriller.
And a friend of mine once said that I do best when I have when I'm bringing archetypes to life, and I think there is an archetype in this book. There's a very androgynous character called Robin Hoodlum.
Robin Hoodlum.
She holds an archetype, and you just gotta read it and get to that part.
Okay, well, I'm gonna dig in. I did go into our local bookstore looking for it, so
you'll have to probably order it. My fortunes have. I had a publisher who was with me through Maeve, but he didn't really want to publish murder mysteries. So I'm really publishing with friends. I have publishing partners. I don't have a publisher. I have publishing partners who are wonderful to work with, have great skills. But I'm essentially self-publishing now. So it's out there. If you want to tell Audrey, it's Ingram Spark that she should.
Okay.
Ingram Spark. So these books are out there, but you'll have to order them. They won't just be on the shelf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I got a joke out of the comment that you made. He didn't want to publish murder mysteries. I was like, well, wasn't the crucifixion of Christ good?
It was a murder mystery. That's a good way to put it. Yes, it was. It was a resurrection mystery.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your journey. And I find it inspiring when people take on small challenges, be it the writing the story on the phone while you're holding a baby, all the way to taking on the Gospels in such a way that actually gives you a positive mention in the Episcopalian Times. I felt like that was a huge feather. Yeah.
And the one thing I forgot to say is my website is Elizabeth Cunningham Writes. So anything that you can't just find easily online or at the bookstore, you can go to the website.
Okay, you guys.
Tevis, thank you so much. You're a great interviewer. You ask great questions, make great comments. Really appreciate you. And also, by the way, everybody, if you want to have any idea of what Maeve looks like, she looks a lot like Tevis.
Which is the biggest compliment I could ever ask for.
I mean, she could have been on the cover.
Instead, you have all this gorgeous Renaissance art with these goddesses. Anyway, so you guys, this has been this week's Game Changer Chat, and I have yet to schedule next week. I'm hounding my desired guest, but all of the Game Changer Chats are really just to give us a sneak peek into the lives, thinking, courage, hearts, and souls of regular folks who do really extraordinary things, no matter what their pursuit is. So if you enjoyed this, please like it, please share it, please check out the other ones. This is, for all of us, it's just a labor of love. So I hope the love is well received. And thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Tevis.
Okay. Bye, y'all.
Bye.